Imagine standing on a battlefield, the ground trembling beneath your feet as an enemy force, 10 times your size, approaches, banners waving, war drums echoing through the air. Your men glance nervously, outnumbered and outmatched, certain that this will be their last dawn. Yet, history has shown us that in the chaos of war, numbers are not always destiny. Time and again, small armies and determined warriors have defied the impossible, crushing opponents who seemed unbeatable. Their victories were not the result of luck, but of genius strategy, insatiable morale, and leaders who dared to rewrite the rules of warfare. In this video, we will dive into some of the most improbable victories in history. Battles where the few triumphed over the many, forever changing the fate of nations. From ancient Greece to the medieval fields of Europe, from the tactics of disciplined phalanxes to the cunning ambushes of guerrilla fighters. These stories will prove that sometimes brains truly outmatch brawn. Stay with me until the end, because the final battle we'll explore might just be the greatest underdog victory in all of history. When we talk about the few defeating the many, one of the earliest and most iconic examples comes from ancient Greece, the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. The Persian Empire, the most powerful force of its time, landed thousands of troops on the plains near Athens, expecting to crush the small city-states. According to historian Herodotus, in the Histories, the Athenians faced a force nearly double their size. Yet under the general Miltiades, they made a bold decision. Rather than waiting defensively, the Athenians charged the Persians head-on. Thermopylae, heavily armored citizen soldiers, used tight phalanx formations to break through the lightly armored Persian lines. It was an act of audacity. To run full speed across the plain toward a larger enemy seemed insane. Yet, that aggressive maneuver shocked the Persians, forcing them into disarray, and the Athenians secured a victory that would inspire generations. This battle demonstrated a timeless principle, that morale, discipline, and initiative can outweigh numbers. As military historian Victor Davis Hanson notes, in a war like no other, the key to Greek success was not sheer strength, but the cultural discipline of men who would stand firm in the field, refusing to yield. Another legendary case is the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. During the 100 Years' War, King Henry V of England faced a French army outnumbering him by at least 3-1. His soldiers were exhausted, hungry, and sick after a long campaign. Yet, Henry's genius lay in using terrain and technology to turn the odds. He positioned his troops in a narrow, muddy field bordered by woods, funneling the French into a killing zone. English longbowmen, armed with weapons that could pierce armor from great distances, devastated the French knights before they even reached melee combat. The heavy mud further slowed the French cavalry, making them easy targets. Historian Juliet Barker in Agincourt. The King, the campaign. The battle emphasizes that the English victory was not merely luck. It was the deliberate application of strategy, preparation, and psychological warfare. Henry's famous speech, immortalized by Shakespeare, was more than poetic. It galvanized his men into believing they could achieve the impossible. The result was one of the most stunning upsets in medieval military history, where a ragtag army carved its name into legend. But it wasn't the only European knights and kings who mastered the art of turning weakness into strength. In the forests of Germania in 09 AD, the Germanic chieftain Arminius lured 3 full Roman legions into an ambush at the Teutoburg Forest. The Romans, led by Publius Quinctilius Varus, believed they were simply marching through allied territory. Instead, Arminius, who had been trained by the Romans themselves, used his knowledge of their tactics to set the perfect trap. As described by Tacitus in Annals, the Romans were stretched out along narrow forest paths when the Germans struck from all sides. The dense trees prevented the Romans from forming their disciplined formations, and rain turned the terrain into a swamp, bogging down their equipment. Over several days of relentless assault, the legions were annihilated. What made this victory so shocking was not just the numbers, but the fact that tribal warriors, considered barbarians, had destroyed Rome's finest soldiers through planning, terrain manipulation, and timing. It was a reminder that even the greatest empire could bleed when arrogance blinded its leaders. Before we continue to even greater battles, let me pause here with a quick message for you. If you're fascinated by these stories of strategy, bravery, and impossible victories, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. That way, you won't miss the next deep dive into the hidden corners of history. Every week, we bring you tales of war, power, and forgotten heroes. And trust me, the battle's still to come, and this video will blow your mind. Moving forward in time, let's explore one of the greatest examples of a small, disciplined force defeating a massive army. The Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, while it's often remembered through the legend of the 300 Spartans, the truth is even more inspiring. King Leonidas of Sparta and his coalition of Greek forces faced the Persian king Xerxes, who brought a colossal army, perhaps hundreds of thousands strong. The Greeks chose to make their stand at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, where the size of the Persian army meant nothing. For 3 days, the Spartans and their allies used the geography of the battlefield to neutralize numerical superiority. As described in histories by Herodotus, the phalanx formation held firm, cutting down wave after wave of Persian troops. Even when betrayed and surrounded, the Spartans fought to the death, buying time for the rest of Greece to mobilize. While, technically, a Persian victory, the moral and symbolic triumph of Thermopylae became a rallying cry that led to the eventual Greek victory at Salamis and Plataea. It showed the world that courage, strategy, and sacrifice could stand against overwhelming force. Another lesser-known, but equally remarkable story comes from medieval Spain. During the Reconquista, El Cid, the Castilian knight and warlord, often commanded forces far smaller than the Muslim armies he faced. In one famous engagement, the Battle of Cabra in 1079, El Cid led a merry 300 men against thousands. Through speed, feigned retreats, and sudden counterattacks, he routed the enemy. Historian Richard Fletcher in The Quest for El Cid highlights how Rodrigo, as he was known, mastered psychological warfare, making enemies believe he had more troops than he actually did, using mobility to his advantage and never engaging in a fight on unfavorable terms. His victories remind us that deception and cunning can sometimes be more powerful than brute force. Fast forward to the 13th century and the rise of the Mongols. Genghis Khan's early campaigns often saw him vastly outnumbered. At the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, for example, his generals faced a coalition of Rus princes and steppe tribes. The Mongols deliberately retreated for days, luring their larger enemy deeper into hostile territory. When the Rus finally engaged, exhausted and overextended, the Mongols turned suddenly, encircled them, and destroyed their army. Historian Jack Weatherford, in Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, describes this as a classic example of strategic patience, pretending weakness to bait an enemy into overconfidence. Here, numbers became irrelevant against the art of deception and mobility. As we near the end of our journey through improbable victories, let us look at one final clash that shook the medieval world. The Battle of Legnano in 1176. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa sought to crush the Lombard League, a coalition of Italian cities. Outnumbered, the militia forces of Lombardy formed around a central symbol, the Carroccia, a great wagon bearing the city's standard. Though less trained than the emperor's knights, the Lombards fought with desperate determination, using defensive formations and local knowledge of the terrain. Against all odds, they defeated Barbarossa's professional army. As historian Thomas Matten notes in Venice, A New History, the battle was a turning point, showing that even ordinary citizens, if well organized and motivated, could resist imperial might. All these stories echo a single truth. In warfare, numbers alone do not guarantee victory. Strategy, leadership, terrain, morale, and sometimes pure audacity can overturn the odds. As the military theorist Karl von Clausewitz once wrote in On War, the strength of an army is not measured merely by its numbers, but by its cohesion, its spirit, and the genius of its commanders. History is filled with examples of the few overcoming the many, and they continue to inspire us today because they speak to something deeper. The belief that no matter the odds, with courage and cunning, the impossible can be achieved. So the next time you hear that something is hopeless, remember the fields of Marathon, the mud of the forests of Teutoburg, and the narrow pass of Thermopylae. Remember how small bands of men, standing firm, changed the fate of civilizations. These victories remind us that human will and ingenuity are forces greater than sheer numbers. And that is why the story of the underdog will never die.